Next on KQED Newsroom, rocky waters for the Port of San Francisco. The Port Commission is called into question for too much political influence and too little public input. The World Cup kicks off soccer mania in the Bay Area. Plus, the provocative photography of Anthony Friedkin captures the dawn of gay culture in California.
They express themselves in a free way with love and affection and humor. So, you know, I wanted to try to record that.
Good evening and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. A civil grand jury report out this week criticizes the Port of San Francisco for its management of the scenic waterfront. The report names several high-profile projects that have made waves, including America's Cup and the 8 Washington Street development proposal. It also says the mayor's office has too much influence and that the Port Commission should seek more public input. Here to explain are Marisa Lagos, San Francisco Chronicle City Hall reporter, and Elena Schmid, San Francisco Civil Grand Jury Foreperson. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Elena, one of your key findings is that recent activities have been strongly influenced by the mayor's office. What are some of the critical projects that have been strongly influenced, and what impact has that had on the public?
I think that the projects that we've looked at recently were the America's Cup, 8 Washington, the Warriors Arena. And when we looked at them, we were looking basically to see how they were developed in terms of who came together to kind of create the project, what was the dollar flow in the projects, what did it mean to the port. And what we found was that when the projects were moving away from the waterfront land use plan, which the port has done, is that they usually got into trouble. The projects got into trouble because there was not public input. There was not citizen input. So basically the port was handed a project, here's the Golden State Warrior, put it on Piers 3032 and we'll use the seawall lot across the way, and there was not a dialogue. The problem is that the port is held in public trust, and public trust says all of us should have the ability to benefit what's happening at the waterfront. And that when you give it to a developer and a private developer, how does that help the rest of the citizens of the city? And public trust actually means the state.
So Marisa, what has been the reaction then from the mayor's office and around City Hall to this report?
You know, I think that a lot of the statements made in the report are things that have sort of been conversations around City Hall for a long time. So I don't think a huge bomb went off, but I do think that these are things that, you know, critics of those projects have been saying for a long time. Voters just passed Proposition B, which was yet another ballot measure sort of limiting development on the waterfront. And this one saying, you know, if you ever want to exceed the existing height limits, you have to go to the voters. And I do think that a lot of the criticisms are fair. You know, the Warriors project certainly is an example of something that I think was sort of negotiated behind closed doors and then presented to the public. You know, if you just look at the list of consultants they had lined up, it was sort of an interesting insight into, I think, what a lot of decision makers thought would be a really easy sell to the public, and that wasn't the case. On the other hand, you know, the port has almost $1.6 billion in infrastructure needs. It's managed by this sort of complicated set of laws because the state lands commission is involved, and BCDC, another state agency, has a lot of say over what they can and can't do. And I do think that the port and to some extent the rest of city officials have been caught between a rock and a hard place. They don't have the money to do this. They need private money. And how do you sort of bridge that gap?
And Elena, how do you strike that balance though? Well, because the port has all this real estate that it does have to lease. It has to keep its eye on revenues because currently the annual revenues are $82 million, not anywhere near what it needs for infrastructure.
Right. And I think that there are a couple of things that go on there. One is that they are actually doing a good job in the real estate business, and their leases are You know, they get them out, they get everything leased. So that part of it is what's helping. They're certainly leasing all those seawall lots for parking, and parking helps a lot. The question is, how do they get more money? And there are probably other options out there that simply have not been explored. And part of the reason that we talk about that they should do an updated waterfront land use plan is that we want to start having them start looking at maritime things again and see what they can do at the maritime front, which at this point, although it's a port, is only 25% of their budget. And so if they can expand that activity in some ways and get more money that way. The other thing is, you say that you know, these projects were kind of handed to them. Part of what we're talking about is, if you look at something like Pier 70, and the way Pier 70 came about was the RFP was put out, but the project was not developed except after the folks who won the RFP had gone to the community hundreds and hundreds of times and listened to what the community had to say, and then they began to develop the project. So that the community felt as though there was a good dialogue going on. They have support. And what happened in the other projects was it was handed to them. So, you know, citizens are going to say, wait a minute, we want to have a say.
I think that's fair. I also think, though, you know, on the flip side of this, we're talking about, you know, multi-million-dollar projects, and it's hard to build in San Francisco anywhere. It's nearly impossible on the waterfront. I do think that there is an argument to be made that the sort of behind-the-scene negotiations do need to take place in some instances. But I also think, like you said, we have an engaged citizenry, and so you can't sort of just pay lip service to that. Even if you're coming with a half-baked or fully-baked project, you still need to bring people in and make them feel like they're part of it.
Sure, and I want to also say that we did invite somebody from the port commissioners to come on. They declined, but Monique Moyer, the port executive director, did issue a statement, and she said that port staff will thoughtfully review each of the civil grand jury's proposed recommendations directed at the port. And then she goes on to say that the San Francisco waterfront is a shared responsibility. What are some of the recommendations you're making, and do you feel like they will be taken seriously?
I do think that they're going to be taken seriously. I thought that the statement that the executive director, that Monique Moyer, put out was a very thoughtful statement. And I think that she heard what we were saying. She has done some amazingly good work. I mean, when you think about the port and everything that's been going on in the past years, the ferry building, all the exploratorium, all the parks that are going on. She's really done an incredible job. And that when she ran into trouble, or when the port ran into trouble, was when they were handing the projects. And so we've tried to say a few things. One thing is that we're saying that maybe the Board of Supervisors should think about asking the state to change right now, under the Burton Act, there's a requirement that all the commissioners have to be appointed by the mayor. And so we're saying maybe the Board of Supervisors should have 2 appointments because it's a more public appointment process. So again, the public could have something to say on that. You know, part of what we're saying is that they should update the the waterfront land use plan and include maritime activities in it. I'm hoping that that will kind of spark something, and that something will go on with that.
I would be surprised if they went to the state, to be honest, to change the makeup of the board. I mean, it'd be a heavy lift. Anything, you know, taking any sort of local issue to the state. I don't know that we have any lawmakers that are going to jump on that. And I think what folks at the mayor's office and even some supervisor's office I talked to said, you know, hey, we do, yes, the mayor nominates people, but we do confirm them. And I think that might be a place that citizens and folks like the grand jury could put some pressure on City Hall to say, okay, you're confirming these people. Are you just sort of rubber stamping them? Because I don't think that in a lot of cases, there's a deferential thing that happens where, you know, people may raise some questions in committee, but there's not as much of a sort of hard look.
And there's definitely a lot at stake here, because the waterfront is something that is enjoyed by people all over the Bay Area. It's not just a San Francisco issue. I know that the civil grand jury is looking at other things as well. Can we expect more reports in the coming weeks?
There'll be more reports in the coming weeks, and I won't indicate how many there are.
And you can't even talk about what you're looking at.
You got it. Complete confidentiality on that.
Okay. Well, thank you both, Marisa Lagos and Elena Schmid.
Thank you very much.
And coming up, a look at the photography of Anthony Friedkin. But first, soccer fans are getting their thrills made all the sweeter by America's win over Ghana Monday in the World Cup. Crowds are gathering around television sets and even catching games at the Civic Center in San Francisco on an outdoor screen. With so many international communities in the Bay Area, the global event is generating much excitement and setting TV viewing records nationwide. Earlier, I spoke with San Francisco Chronicle sports writer Ann Killian. Ann Killian, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, the U.S. beat Ghana Monday for the first time. What impact do you think that win is now having as Team USA prepares for Sunday's match against Portugal?
Well, it creates a lot of momentum, a lot of excitement. There's been the way the U.S. won that game, I think, impassioned the fans. It was so exciting, you know, a late game goal to win it. It looked like they had the win, then they were tied, and then they came back to win it, and it was a very gritty, kind of tough win, and that's kind of qualities we like in our American team. So I think everyone's really, really excited. This was called the Group of Death. There was a lot of thought that the U.S. wouldn't get through it, and now I think there's a lot of excitement that the U.S. will continue to play for a while.
And do you think that win is really helping to propel soccer's popularity? I mean, it seems to be growing in popularity. That match had record ratings for ESPN and Univision.
Yes, I mean, I think every win helps propel the sport forward. And every 4 years, we do these stories and we talk about, wow, soccer is really growing in this country, and how big is it, and how much bigger do you think it'll get? And every 4 years at the World Cup, the numbers increase, the fan base increases, the social media, especially this time around, really increases, the ratings are up. So, I mean, I think it's hard to quantify how much it is grown, but I know that the first World Cup I ever covered was the one here at home in 1994, and we're on a completely different planet when it comes to what the experience of soccer is in this country now compared to then. And
this is the world's biggest sport. And even though its popularity is growing here in the U.S., it really hasn't caught on. And why is that?
Well, I mean, I would kind of disagree. I think it is catching on, and I think that we're such a huge and diverse population, and we have so many sports that we don't have, like in some other countries, you know, the one focal sport, which is for many, many countries around the world, is soccer. I mean, NFL is king in terms of ratings, gamblings, advertisement, all of that stuff, media exposure. We have baseball, we have basketball, we have hockey. But soccer has really gained a foothold, and I think what's happened, especially in maybe the last 4 or 5 years, is the American soccer fan who maybe didn't grow up with the game has gotten increasingly sophisticated. There's a huge population now that grew up playing the game, but also now they can be exposed to the greatest players in the world because of cable television. And so every weekend you can look at the EPL, you can look at the Italian league, you can look at the Spanish league and see the best players in the world, and that really has made people appreciate the game.
And we have such a huge international population here in the Bay Area. I mean, I was in the Mission District last night, and you couldn't pass by a bar without seeing some sign that talked about the World Cup. Here in the Bay Area, there are also efforts to try to expand the sport. The San Jose Earthquakes and the 49ers recently entered an agreement to bring world-class soccer to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara. Will that make a big difference?
Yeah, I think it's, again, the chance to see the great players. Real Madrid, which won the Champions League this year, is going to be playing at Cal this summer. And they, you know, have Cristiano Ronaldo, who is one of the best players in the world, and a whole bunch of superstars. And there's, you know, whether those guys will play, they're having a pretty busy summer. But whenever those teams come to the Bay Area, they have great sales. There's a lot more exposure and marketing of great teams to the American audience. There's a realization that, you know, there are a ton of soccer fans here, and you're right. I mean, the passion. Last week I went to the England-Italy game, spent half of it in an English bar in the Haight, and then half of it in North Beach, and it was just so much fun to see these impassioned fan bases.
Yeah, who had the better beer?
Well, English had the better beer, but Italy got the win, so.
And a victory for you all around.
Absolutely.
We can't talk about the World Cup without at least touching on the 2022 World Cup. There's some controversy about that. It was handed to Qatar, and there are now allegations of corruption and bribery about the way that decision came down. Do you think that will now maybe help give the U.S. a chance of landing that?
Well, I think that there are a lot of problems with the 2022 bid. The U.S. had been in the bidding process, and all of a sudden this little tiny nation in the Middle East ends up with it. And I think a lot of people, when that happened, said, I wonder how that happened. FIFA has never been known for its being completely above board when it hands out these big events. So there are allegations of bribery. It's 120 degrees there in the summer. It's not the right place to play soccer. There's talk of moving it to a Winter World Cup, which all the soccer leagues around the world are very opposed to. There's a lot of controversy, and if it was pulled from Qatar, I believe that the U.S. would probably get it because we don't have any need to build stadiums. We have the infrastructure. We finished second, and I think we could easily host another World Cup.
All right, and I know you'll be watching that, and at least a couple more weeks of watching soccer World Cup for you as well.
I can't get off my couch.
And thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next weekend marks the 45th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in New York City, the spark that touched off the gay liberation movement. As the LGBT community prepares to celebrate Pride Week in San Francisco, the DeYoung Museum is presenting a new exhibit of photographs by Anthony Friedkin. Titled The Gay Essay, these provocative images of queer life in San Francisco and LA were made in the late 1960s and early 70s when homosexuality was still illegal in California. It took more than 40 years for Friedkin's project to get a full public exhibition. Scott Schaefer has our story.
Don, hey. Oh, it's so...
What a delight.
In West Hollywood, two old friends, Don Kilhefner and Anthony Friedkin, reunite.
I even have the camera that I shot all the photos with. This was the camera. This baby was the one that did it all.
The camera that set them on a journey together decades ago. All gathered this night in honor of Kilhefner and other pioneering gay rights activists.
Wow, all right.
Placed at the center of the mural are Don Kilhefner with Morris Kite to his left, founders of the Gay Liberation Front in Los Angeles, a photograph taken by Friedkin at the dawn of the gay liberation movement. It was 1969, a time when no one was producing murals in honor of gay life. But a societal shift was taking place.
It was really about saying, no, we won't accept this anymore.
In cities across America, gay people were fighting back, something that wasn't lost on 19-year-old Anthony Friedkin.
There's something that is referred to as the concerned photographer. And the idea is that you celebrate humanity for its good things, but you also identify the things that need to be reevaluated and changed.
What Friedkin saw needing change was attitudes toward homosexuality.
I thought it was horrible the way gay people were treated by our society. It made me angry.
Friedkin grew up in Los Angeles.
His father was a screenwriter. His mother was a dancer, choreographer. They had tons of friends who were gay. He had been around gay people all of his life, so it didn't seem strange to him.
They expressed themselves in a free way with love and affection and humor. So, you know, I wanted to try to record that, you know, just out of the dignity that I thought they deserved that many people wouldn't give them.
So Friedkin sought out Kite and Kilhefner, who had just founded the Gay Community Services Center in Los Angeles. They gave him access to a world that was just emerging from the shadows.
He comes across as real. And at that time, as a young man, you know, he was on fire. He was on fire with creativity. He saw things that other people didn't see.
Friedkin dedicated 2 years capturing and printing the most powerful images possible.
It was not unusual at that time for cars with 4 or 5 young people in it with baseball bats to stop a gay person on the street and beat them senseless. So it was dangerous, even associating with gay people at that time. What Tony did was he ventured into this dangerous space and he took his photographs.
But the photographs were ahead of their time, and most galleries wouldn't show them. Until now. The culmination of Friedkin's vision took 45 years, but it's now being realized at the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. The exhibit, titled The Gay Essay, is under the direction of Chief Photography Curator Julian Cox.
Julian, this looks fantastic. Oh my God, look at this. Oh, wow. This guy can play like a halfback. There's so much of the gay essay in his spirit.
Anthony's whole approach to what he does is very immersive. He really believed that to make good work, you had to be deeply connected to your subject.
I really believe that the print is such an important part of the art form of photography. Jim was such an extraordinary young man. You know, he was Chicano, and he lived in a hardcore gang-infested area. And to be gay in that kind of a community and to come out openly that way and walk around the neighborhood.
What do you see in those eyes?
There's a curiosity in his eyes about what his future might be like, what the path that he's chosen to go down.
And this is Troy Perry here, I think, right?
Troy Perry, yes.
He founded the Metropolitan Community Church,
correct.
Right? Yeah.
This was a very dark, tragic day. His church was burnt down. Look in his eyes. He's defiant. He's saying, you know, I'm here to take you on.
It was that new gay liberation spirit. We were demanding it. You take your freedom. And it was that audacious attitude that was the climate of the times. And Tony caught that.
Ah, divine, the one and only.
Yes.
Oh my God, this was such an incredible experience.
And she was with the Coquettes?
The Coquettes,
I didn't
yes.
know that.
When Friedkin heard about San Francisco's wildly popular Coquettes, he couldn't get to North Beach fast enough to film behind the scenes. Like now, North Beach was a bustling neighborhood and home to some of the first gay bars and nightclubs in San Francisco.
The ensemble cast of the Coquettes and Divine and the energy and the way they did their musical numbers around Edgar Allan Poe and Mask of the Red Death. Yeah. I mean, it was just fantastic, you know.
Their images also now captured for all time in a book just published by Yale University Press.
Oh, that's great. Oh my God. Look at those two characters. He humanized it. When I was looking again at the photograph of Morris Kite and myself, a tear came to my eye. Those were very difficult days for gay people. There was the amount of oppression that we faced everywhere was tremendous.
You have to put it in a historical context.
Hal Fisher was a photography critic for Art Week and Art Forum in the 70s and is the author of 2 books on gay culture.
We have a lot of people in that period that were doing documentation of what was happening in the gay movement. But Anthony Friedkin's work goes beyond documentation. It's art.
Over time, gay imagery in the arts has evolved in response to events shaping the gay community, with photographers like Nan Golden and Catherine Opie and Peter Hujar.
Without doubt, the AIDS epidemic totally informed and generated really powerful imagery. And some very important artists who had AIDS, and I think specifically David Wojnarowicz.
Images by young contemporary photographers like Ryan McGinley reflect a newfound freedom in LGBT life.
But it's freedom that came at a cost.
A price Friedkin was willing to pay.
This camera has so many of those private, special moments that it was a witness to. If anything happened to this camera, God, I don't know what I'd do. I really don't know what I'd do.
Still a purist, shooting black and white film with his Leica. Still committed to capturing that decisive moment, like in his recent Waves series, exhibited at the High Museum in Atlanta, and still pushing the limits.
I actually started surfing right around the same time I started photographing. There's a parallel about what they call going for it in surfing, where you absolutely just abandon all sense of safety, and you just hope to God that you're going to make it. I think the risk that we take as artists is critical to our ability to do interesting work and how much risk we're willing to take.
The Gay Essay is on exhibit at the De Young Museum in San Francisco through the end of the year. And for a visual history of 45 years of LGBT photography, go to KQEDnews.org. And joining me now for a look at upcoming stories is Scott Schaefer. Hi, Scott.
Hi, Twee.
Well, more changes coming for the state Supreme Court. Justice Marvin Baxter announced he's retiring after 24 years. This now gives Governor Brown another opportunity to make an appointment. What difference is this likely to have?
Well, Marvin Baxter, no question, one of the most conservative, if not the most conservative justice. Joyce Kennard, somewhere in the middle to liberal. So when you replace 1 out of 7, especially a conservative with a more liberal judge, one closer to Jerry Brown's philosophy, you begin to see a difference in close votes. For example, the gay marriage vote was 4-3, legalizing gay marriage in 2008. Baxter was against gay marriage. Now, it passed anyway, it was approved anyway, but nonetheless, on those close votes, it makes a difference. And of course, you know, the bench could use more diversity in the eyes of many. There's no Latino justice, there's no African-American justice, so, you know, he'll have an opportunity now to diversify the bench with his 2 appointments.
And there are several good candidates he could choose from, including some he's already appointed to lower courts. Let's talk about the lower courts for a minute. The governor appoints all Superior Court and State Appeals Court judges. He made 15 appointments this week. What stands out about the appointments he's made?
He's appointed over 200 judges so far, and what stands out is a lot of firsts. The first Hmong judge in Merced County, the first female judge in Del Norte County, the first Latina judge in Riverside County. So you see him really digging deep, looking for different kinds of judges, more public defenders, more defense attorneys, more public interest lawyers, fewer prosecutors and district attorneys. So really, as Jerry Brown does often, looking at these kinds of appointments in a different way than other governors have.
Let's turn our attention to the state controller's race, one of the tightest races for controller in recent memory. 2.5 weeks after the election, we still don't know who's going to come in second and make it to November. Some updated numbers, though.
Crazy close. The mayor of Fresno came in first, Ashley Swearingen, but Betty Yee, the Board of Equalization member from San Francisco, is just 667 votes ahead of John Perez, the former Assembly Speaker from Los Angeles. So,
and that's out of 4 million votes cast.
Out of 4 million votes. So, it's, you know, the old adage, every vote counts. Yeah. They're going to have to count every vote to really know for sure. But it looks pretty good for Betty Yee when you look at where the votes uncounted lie. They tend to be in places like Marin and Yolo and Santa Cruz, places that she did pretty well. So I would say she's in good shape, but we won't know for sure until those last ballots are counted.
Any chance for a recount?
There's no automatic recount provision in California like there is in some states. Now, one of the candidates could ask for a recount. We'll have to wait and see if that happens.
Okay. All right, Scott, thank you.
You bet.
And that is it for tonight.
I'm Scott Schaefer. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Thuy Vu. Have a good night.
Funding for KQED Arts is provided by the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and by Diane B. Wilsey. Additional funding is provided by Helen Sarah Steyer and Gretchen Kimball.